Welcome back to the Banderpod, the frabjous and fascinating podcast of Bandersnatch books. We're a small press publisher of treasures found off the beaten path for lovers of all that is good, true, and beautiful. I'm Carolyn Claire Gibbons, and today I'm talking with Diana Glyer about the Inklings and creating in community. Diana Glyer, welcome to the Banderpod.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here. I'm excited about our conversation today.
I am too. So, we have mentioned you on this podcast probably in almost every episode. So it's a good thing we finally got you to show your voice. But tell us a little bit about yourself and your background. Kind of who are you and what do you do? And then we'll dig into specifically the connections here.
Absolutely. Well, I have the privilege of teaching at Azusa Pacific University. And there are a lot of things that I love about teaching in the Honors College, but one of them is when we're dealing with great books, we're dealing with big ideas. And it's so much fun to engage this rising generation with life's great questions and to look at literally the best that's ever been written and pondered about these things. Just finished a unit on Thomas Aquinas, which has been fascinating, getting ready to go into some study of Dante in the next couple of weeks. So that's what I do. I love teaching. That's my first love. And then in addition, I've been writing ever since I was young. When I started reading stories as a kid, I also started writing stories. And so it's been a privilege to do a fair amount of writing of books of various kinds, including a play script or two, some short stories, memoir type of writing, and so on, as well as the scholarly work.
Yeah. Have you always taught at Azusa Pacific or have you taught elsewhere as well?
No, I've taught elsewhere. I taught in Chicago, taught in Southern Missouri. So I've had the privilege of teaching in a number of different places. But I've been at Azusa for, 30 years now.
Wow.
So it's been a while. When I moved to California, I told myself it was just going to be for 3 years, and then I would go back to the Midwest, which feels more real to me. I don't know if you ever have this feeling, Carrie, but sometimes California feels like it's not quite real.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
So I'm still kind of getting used to California, but I love APU. I love what we do there. I love our vision. And the kind of students that we attract there are just such a delight to work with. So I'm a happy camper.
Good. I'm so glad. Okay, so in your scholarly work, a lot of what you have researched is the Inklings, which whenever I'm describing that to someone, I always say C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien and their friends, because most people don't know everybody. But those two names, at least, are generally familiar. But before we get deeply into what you have studied about them, what started your interest in the Inklings?
So I started studying the Inklings when I was in high school.
Okay.
And so we read Lord of the Rings repeatedly, gave each other names based on the characters, and did that whole thing when we were very nerdy high schoolers, and continued to try to read things that were like Lord of the Rings. And then I stumbled onto C.S. Lewis and absolutely fell in love, particularly with Out of the Silent Planet. There's something about that book, and particularly the way that it situates the spiritual experience that really resonated with me. I was a fairly new Christian at the time that I first read that book. When I found out that C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien were friends, I thought, I want to be at that table. I want to sit with these guys and just listen to what that conversation must have been like. And I thought it would be easy to find somebody who would give me that kind of inside look.
Right.
Who they were, what they talked about. I guess my burning questions were, what did they talk about? And secondly, what difference did their conversations make to their creative work? Because I've always been interested in creativity. Where does it come from? How do we cultivate it? And then as I learned more and more, how do we call that forth in each other? How do we bless and call forth one another's gifts? Because I believe that collaboration is exponential. You think, well, you get one person and they can do a certain amount of work. You get two, you don't get twice as much work, you get 10 times as much.
I love that.
Because of the way that iron sharpens iron, you add a third, and all of a sudden it's 1,000 times more fun and more productive. So that whole process has always fascinated me. And I got really interested in the nature of the group. And again, two guiding questions for me is what did they talk about? And then what difference did it make in the work that they were doing? And I found that no one had really written about that.
Mm-hmm.
Humphrey Carpenter had written a couple of books at that time. One book about Tolkien, a rather famous biography of him,
Mm-hmm.
and then a book about the Inklings as a group. But in that Inklings book, Carpenter insisted that the members of the Inklings had no influence on each other. Now, you have to remember, I was just in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm thinking, I know this man is very smart, and I know I'm just a high school kid, but I don't think that's right.
Right.
Because I'm thinking, okay, there's 19 men who are members of the group. They're meeting twice a week for 17 years.
Right.
And he's saying that they have no influence on each other. It didn't sit right with me. And so
Yeah.
I thought, well, I got to find out what else has been written. And again, not with the outside vision, the
Yeah.
vision that's like they met on such and such a date and they taught this kind of thing and they
Mm-hmm.
lived in this, but what happened inside them, if a fly on the wall perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And no one had done that. And I thought, well, here's something that I'm interested in. Here's something I'm passionate about. I really want to dig deeply into this. And so 23 years later, I found the answers to my questions and wrote about them in a book called The Company They Keep. My hope for that book is that it might help people to answer the same questions that I had, but also that it might counter this idea that creativity is essentially a solo activity.
Yeah.
When you picture an author at work, you picture somebody solitary, probably tortured and solitary, right? It's the image of the author. I think we get that from Stephen King more than anything else. But, the person who withdraws, the person who's antisocial, the person who's, mumbling to themselves and banging away at a typewriter in an attic on a dark and stormy night. No, I
So,
mean, what I learned in my research, not only about the Inklings, but more broadly,
mm-hmm.
looking at the creative process itself, is that productive and happy authors, productive and happy creatives always seem to find a circle that not only supports the vision that they have, what I call a resonator,
Mm-hmm.
but also challenges them and maybe offers some accountability in the best sense of
Mm-hmm.
that word. I don't like the word accountability. I use the word expectation,
Mm-hmm.
right? That sense that we can serve one another by standing on tiptoe and say, what are you working on? How's
Right.
that coming? Tell me more about your vision for that.
Right.
Because those simple questions often can catalyze the sense that what an author is doing actually matters. And so that's the nature of my work, particularly in the company they keep.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's essentially that was your doctoral dissertation, correct?
In a way, in a way.
Okay.
So my doctoral dissertation, I don't know if your listeners have ever done a dissertation, but a dissertation
I
is about
haven't.
proving that you've got what it takes to get a seat at the table,
Right.
allows you to go ahead and do the work that God has
Gotcha.
put in your heart that you've always dreamed of doing. And so what I did in my dissertation is try to defend an approach to studying the Inklings that's
Mm-hmm.
based on current studies of writing groups in classrooms. So, one of the things about a writing group is it's really hard to find some kind of mechanism to describe what's happening.
Yeah.
So, you think about if I were to videotape classroom writing groups over a 3 year period, what would I see and how could I categorize the kind of feedback and its effectiveness?
Mm-hmm.
And so, a wonderful researcher, compositionist called Karen Burke Lefevre, did a fantastic study exactly as I described it. She visited classrooms, she looked at students who were in writing groups, and she came up with these categories for how do we discuss, describe, and quantify the impact of the feedback that happens when writers get together and give one another critique, encouragement, accountability, editing, suggestions, all those kinds of categories.
Hmm.
So my dissertation was proving that these categories are valid not just for classroom situations, but also in looking at a literary group from the past.
Right.
So my dissertation proved that the model is efficacious.
Uh-huh.
My magnum opus, the company they keep,
Uh-huh.
was trying to dig deeply into how this system applies to the Inklings.
Yeah.
In addition to Lefevre's categories, I added another category that's characteristic of the Inklings, and I found it's characteristic of a lot of writers who work together.
Hmm.
That's a category I call reference.
Mm.
When writers are meeting regularly, a lot of times they slip in little jokes or little references,
Yes.
or they base characters on one another, or they steal lines from one another that
Yep.
they work into the mouth of a character. And the Inklings did that constantly. So I have a whole chapter on that in this book. But have you noticed that maybe about
Yeah,
writers?
absolutely. And among my writing friends, the Habit community, for example, that Jonathan Rogers organizes, the number of times that there are references to something that is either an in joke within the community or somebody just makes sure there's an alligator in their story because they love Jonathan, whatever it is, I think that definitely happens. And then within obviously the Inklings work, I mean, you have in the Lord of the Rings, you have, characters that are embodiments maybe, but even like in Out of the Silent Planet, it's Elwyn Ransom. Is that right?
Elwyn, it
Yeah.
means elf friend. And
Gee, I
that
wonder I wonder who that's based on. And he's a philologist.
And remember that that novel started before the Inklings weren't novelists, right?
Right.
And it's a very early Lewis work in that sense,
Hmm.
although he'd been writing for a lifetime. But it was his first attempt to write what we would think of as a popular novel.
Hmm.
And yes, it started as a bet between Tolkien and Lewis about who was going to write the kind of books they liked to read.
Right.
And so started in on a project that, like many of his projects, just, didn't get completed after a couple of chapters. He just abandoned it. But Lewis went ahead and clearly started the book anyway, based on trying to get back at Tolkien for this project that they had been embarking upon.
Oh, I love that. So as you worked on the company they keep, and then you then adapted that for the common reader, and that's kind of where Bandersnatch, your book Bandersnatch came out of. But the research process and everything behind that, what does that research look like for you?
So, in trying to look at the idea of influence, what I had to do is that very common scholarly thing of asking the question, what do we mean
Mm.
when we say influence? So, I did a really deep dive into the literature
Hmm.
about the nature of particularly literary influence. And what I discovered is that most of the common definitions, like the encyclopedia textbook definitions of influence, are rooted in the idea of imitation.
Mm. Yep.
So if one of the things that I do is I paint. So if you looked at my paintings and you would say, Diana Glyer's paintings show the influence of Picasso because they show some of his techniques, some of his color schemes, some of his design
Hmm.
and layout. What you'd be looking at is you'd look at something in Picasso, something in my work, and then you would look for those kinds of either similarities or sometimes what we call negative influence, which means they're reacting against something that is evident in another writer's or painter's or artist's work. So influence itself sounds like a pretty simple and straightforward thing, but usually it's limited to an understanding of imitation.
Hmm.
It looks like it has some of the same qualities of.
Hmm.
That's a really useful thing if the two individuals that you're comparing are not contemporaries.
Right.
I think the breakthrough for the company they keep and then for Bandersnatch was asking a different question. How do comments, questions, time spent together, rubbing shoulders, sharing stories, how do you quantify that kind of influence?
Right.
The kind of people you're having coffee with influence you in a different way than the people that you're studying from the past.
Absolutely.
And so that was kind of the breakthrough, I think, in terms of the nature of influence. So then the question is back to your question, how do you track that?
Yeah.
Well, so my work, and the reason it took me so long was to try to find what I called a perfect sequence.
Uh-huh.
So, a perfect sequence is we have a rough draft of a work. We have specific evidence that one of the inklings said or did something.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the revised version
Mm-hmm.
that shows that what was said or done made a change. So, it's a shift from looking for similarity to change,
Yeah.
right? So, I found a lot of those perfect sequences, but in order to do that, I had to look at the manuscripts, the drafts. And then I had to look at the letters and the diaries to see what did they say about that draft.
Right.
And then I had to look for the published version and compare that to the draft and see if what they said changed
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's so cool, Diana.
So so I'm going through the archives in the Wade Center, in the Bodleian, all of these places at a time that a lot of the stuff wasn't available in any other way. So
Right.
I'm looking at the manuscript evidence.
Yeah.
Thank God they didn't have word processors. And we do have these manuscripts, and I would be reading, here's Tolkien's first draft, second draft, third draft of a chapter. Here's what I know they talked about because Warren Lewis records in his diary, da 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 da
Mm-hmm.
da, was talked about at the meeting. And then I look and see what happens in the next draft. So let me give you an example.
Yeah.
We know that there's a section of Lord of the Rings when the hobbits are getting ready to leave Hobbiton.
Mm-hmm.
C.S. Lewis read that section
Mm-hmm.
and specifically said, this was one of my favorites because it's very specific. He goes back to Tolkien and he says, this is great stuff, but there's too much dialogue, not enough action.
Mm-hmm.
You got to pick up the pace.
Mm-hmm.
And so you look, I mean, it's very simple because you can count it,
Right.
right? And you look at the percentage of dialogue in the draft, and then the next draft, almost half the dialogue is
Wow.
cut,
Yeah.
and the action is much tighter. And the style happens to be better at that point. But then you can go look more broadly in the parts that he wrote before this scene, how much dialogue is there? We
Mm.
know that Tolkien said, Hobbit talk amuses me,
Uh-huh.
right? And he actually refers to this comment that Lewis made and says, Hobbit talk amuses me, but not my friends so much, right? So I'll have to curtail that. And then you ask the question, does he curtail it?
Right.
You look, and sure enough, there's a different dramatic tension in the narrative after that scene as he continues to unfold the story.
Yeah.
That was the basis of the research, and it was more fun than anything
I
to be
love
able
it.
to get right into the depths of the
Yeah.
creative process.
Yeah. I'm just imagining. I'm imagining the movie version of your life, Diana. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. It's written like and plays out like a mystery novel, or a mystery movie where your detective goes digging for the pieces and like, here's the theory and I need to put the pieces together and finding it. Solutions.
Well, if you have a vision for that, that would be great. Because, of course, when I started, I was a kid
Right.
presenting this research, these examples
Mm-hmm.
at conferences. The truth is, I actually got booed off a stage one
Mm,
time, and I had people arguing with
mm,
me. And a lot of their argument, well, some of it was a little bit problematic in that they would say, well, you're American, you don't know anything about these British writers.
of
But I
course.
actually had people saying, you're female and you can't
Mm,
really talk about the interaction of these male writers.
right.
What I felt personally was I was just beginning.
Right.
I was just a kid trying to take on the Goliaths, right?
Right.
Because this was in fact the received wisdom at that time. all I wanted in terms of my research was the possibility that I might get a seat at the table
Yeah.
and be able to propose this alternative way of looking at it. And it's been amazing to see the field shift because when I used to talk about it, I used to get all kinds of pushback and argument and now it's really interesting and I'll say, yeah, the Inklings influenced each other and people go, yeah, they did.
And you're like,
Cool.
that was me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's really cool. Bandersnatch came about in a different way. Carrie, do you know the
Okay.
story of how that book got
I
written?
feel like I've heard you tell it, but I don't know that I've got all the details in my brain.
So I was using the company they keep as a textbook in a class. I had the privilege over time, from time to time, of teaching a class on the Inklings, which is just more fun than's probably allowed. So I was teaching it. We were reading the company they keep, and after class, one of my students lingered for a few moments, and we were chatting. And she says, "You know, Dr. Glyer, you wrote the company they keep as if you care about every single detail of the lives of these authors." And I said, "Yeah, I do." And she said, "Not everybody does."
Mm.
So rather than flunking her, I couldn't get this comment out of my mind. Not everybody does. And it just seemed interesting to me. Could I write a book for someone like her who doesn't want all of the nitty gritty details? So, company they keep had to be tightly argued and abundant
Right.
in all of these kinds of nitty gritty details. And for some of us, we just love that stuff.
Yeah.
Remember, I'm looking for that fly on the wall, seat at the table. Just, I want to get right in the midst of it,
Yeah.
right? Kind of perspective. But not everybody does. And so with Bandersnatch, I thought to myself, could I write a book that, first of all, is more closely focused simply on Lewis and Tolkien and not all of the 19 men who were part of the group? And could I add a third question? Not only what did they say and what difference did it make,
Hmm.
but how might we learn from their example?
Right.
And so, in order to write that book, I really wanted to get together a team to help me to write that kind of book. And so, I got together about a dozen students, and we met every week for 14 months.
Wow.
And we read sections of the company they keep out loud. We went through it. We stripped out the things that we thought the average reader maybe wouldn't be so interested in,
Hmm.
kept the bones of the argument, and then tried to elaborate, how does this apply to me?
Right.
How could I get a bit of that? Because a lot of times people who are interested in the Inklings, their next question isn't the question, how did they influence each other? Their next question is, how could I do what they do
Yeah.
from the fact that they were so faithful for so many years to be up in each other's business as creative writers, right?
Right.
And you may remember that in the back of each chapter there's a little note
Yes.
which very, very explicitly gives an application tip.
Hmm.
And then there's just a different tone to the whole thing because
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's been successful in reaching people that aren't necessarily interested in Lewis or Tolkien particularly,
Right.
but just are interested in this idea. Can collaboration help
Hmm.
me do what I'm called to do? Can collaboration help my work to be improved? Can it improve the quality of my ideas? Can it help me when I get stuck?
Right.
Can it help me when I'm discouraged? And that's what Bandersnatch was written to do.
Hmm.
I would say maybe one way to think about it is that company they keep is very informative.
Hmm.
But my dream was for Bandersnatch to be generative.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons why Bandersnatch Books, why your publishing house is a dream come true for me, because it means that that seed that I planted is bearing fruit. And then I hear about writing groups that are started literally around the world, people
Yeah.
reading the book together and then deciding to gather, people following the model of the Inklings, starting small
Yep.
and then growing into something great. It's a thrill. I can't think of another word. It's thrilling for me
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
see that generative quality of that book.
Yeah. Well, and it was such a gift to us when we started as a writers group, to have even just those practical, the little box at the end of every chapter, how to do what the Inklings did, those practical steps, because that's when you're trying to start a creative group of any kind, whatever collaboration, writing, etc. The how, it's like, yeah, we want to do this. Yeah, we're interested in this, but how do we actually do it? And make it useful, not just a whole group of us are getting together, because we'll influence one another, but it may not be generative, as you're saying.
Right.
And so, having those kind of concrete, practical steps was such a gift for us starting a writers group that, like, everybody read the book before we started meeting so that we all kind of came in with the same ethos of this is how we're going to run this group. And these are the kinds of questions that we'll ask each other at the end of a reading, or, the way that we'll make suggestions. And, you just gave us such an incredible framework to establish a creative group. And then out of that, it then generated three of us spinning off into a publishing company. And listeners, we like to call Diana our fairy godmother. So, I mean, you mentioned the word thrilling, but when you follow us on social media and we run into you at conferences and stuff like that. And when you see those books, like, what goes on in your heart?
I think for all of us, one of our deepest desires is to know that we had an impact, right?
Mm,
I happen, this is going to sound like a side track, but bear with me for just a second.
yeah,
I'm a huge fan of Hamilton, the musical. And I think that part of the reason that Hamilton is so powerful has to do with the idea of legacy,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And I think all of us throughout our life hear that undercurrent of a whisper. Will my life matter? Will anything that I do make a difference? And
Hmm.
we make a difference in lots of different ways.
Right,
But for me to see that the writing that I've done has, in fact, inspired others, given them sort of a stair step toward being able to accomplish something that they know they couldn't have, perhaps, without these groups that are forming and without this sort of model that gives a scaffolding
right.
the things that are in their hearts to actually accomplish. And so that's what it is for me. It's my own fascination with creativity and collaboration in general, and the Inklings in particular, has been a legacy.
Yeah.
And it's meant a lot to me. What you're doing is so fabulous because you've taken on the mantle then of encouraging and supporting and challenging and sharpening others
Hmm.
as they're trying to create books that in their turn will be generative.
Right. I recently saw a meme that said something to the effect of, in all of the science fiction time travel stories, everybody who goes back in time is so concerned about changing one little thing that's going to alter history. And yet in our lives, we don't think that a little thing that we do is going to change anything.
Oh, that's so good.
And I
Oh my
was
gosh,
like,
that's so good.
oh, dang. Because it is. We do those little things, your high school fascination with, well, but how did they influence each other? That's the seed,
Yes.
and your commitment to follow that question led to, all of the things that it has led to. But then it was, a 16, 17-year-old kid saying, I'm interested in this. Let me dig into it.
And the very first thing that I ever wrote about the Inklings was a book report for a class in 11th grade.
I love it.
In that book report, just started to ask some questions. Is it possible
Yeah,
that the sphere of influence of these authors on one another is,
right.
and it felt like, oh, I'm telling you, I felt tiny.
Yeah,
And it felt like such a small and insignificant thing. I was standing up to my teacher to ask this question,
right.
much less to take on the whole scholarly community
Yeah,
in terms of assumptions that were made.
yeah.
There's an idea in Bandersnatch that's been particularly helpful for so many folks, and that's the idea of a resonator.
Hmm.
A lot of times when we think about writing groups, we really focus on once you have a draft, people read it and then critique it.
Right,
And to critique something is to look to see what's wrong and
right,
then try to correct that.
right.
And I think that this more robust view of what a writing group can do has been enormously helpful for so many people. So we talk about accountability or we talk about encouragement, but the idea of a resonator has been so key, I think, for a lot of folks. People underestimate the impact that it has in terms of the things that I talk about in Bandersnatch. So a resonator is somebody who catches the vision
Hmm.
and simply, well, to resonate means to vibrate at the same frequency, right?
Right.
So you think about the body of a violin picks up the sound of the string and amplifies it.
Hmm.
Or a piano, the body of the piano picks up the little sound that's
Hmm.
made by the string and amplifies it. And not all of us can critique. Not
Right.
all of us have the gift of encouragement, but all of us can be resonators
Hmm.
in the sense that we amplify the ideas. So Carrie comes to me and she says, I'm thinking about writing a poem about this and thus. And I say, tell me more about that.
Hmm.
I'm resonating.
Hmm.
I'm opening it up. I'm looking at face to face possibilities, giving her a chance to articulate that more robustly by asking good questions, by simply being a good listener,
Yeah.
right? That can transform the trajectory of a
Right.
work.
Right.
And the thing about being a resonator is we can do that not only with one another's creative projects, but with one another's lives
Yeah.
by just learning to ask better questions, to lean in when people are talking about daring possibilities in a way that I don't know that I'm brave enough to imagine.
Yeah.
That's a powerful gift
Yeah.
that we can, in fact, give to one another.
It is. It is. I met you, I believe, in 2016. So you'd been doing career for a long time by the time you came across my radar. We met at Hutchmoot and you were talking about resonators and I mean, now before we started recording, you asked me what I was writing. And that just, those questions make, even when I'm in a season where I'm not actively working on something, having someone ask me that question is a nudge, that just warms the part of my heart that wants to be writing. So I want to mention we don't have time to dive in on it. Last spring at the Square Halo conference, you were the keynote there and you kind of talked through your book Clay in the Potter's Hands and the metaphor of God is the potter and we are the clay. Like that weekend of listening to you talk through that metaphor, just I was in a season where I'd been doing a lot of doing for God and was needing the reminder that who I am is the being with God. And that's the most important foundation of that. And I'd been spending a lot of time thinking about the fruit of the Spirit leading up to that weekend, and that the fruit of the Spirit is not something you can accomplish, it is fruit. It is something that is. So we're not going to dig in because we would be on here for another hour. So
Another podcast, another
exactly,
time, right?
exactly.
There you go.
But thank you for that.
Thank you.
We will switch and I'll ask just a few popcorn questions. The first of them, hopefully very easy, could be a list, I understand, is what are you reading right now?
Oh boy, my to-do stack is about 5 feet high. Our book club has been reading the books in the number one ladies
Oh,
detective
yes. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
that some of you may know. They're charming, charming books. And they have some of the same flavor as another favorite series of mine, which I'm rereading, which is the Mitford books.
Nice.
And so that's my casual reading when I'm not working my way through Thomas Aquinas and preparing for class by reading Aristotle.
You know,
So, yeah,
that's fair.
yeah, that's my fun reading these days.
Yes.
One of my very best friends hates the Mitford books, and we were
Uh-huh.
arguing about this the other day, and she says, but nothing happens in Mitford. And I'm like, Exactly.
That's the point.
Exactly. They are charming little stories about people that you come to deeply care for, and it's a way to get away
Love
from the
it.
things that plague us
I love it.
sometimes in a world that's far too serious.
It's true. It's true. So I'm going to say that your answer to this cannot be a Bandersnatch. If you could be a mythical creature, what would you be?
A mythical creature, not a real one,
Right.
huh? Hmm. A mythical creature, and it can't be a Bandersnatch. See, let's see, that's so not
Because
fair.
I know that would be the
Uh,
easy answer.
but I'm not very
This
dragony
is fair.
in my
Uh-huh.
personality, so I don't know that I would be a
Okay.
Bandersnatch because by definition they're pretty fierce and
And
ferocious.
frumious.
No, you know what? I think you have bestowed upon me the great honor of being a fairy
Ooh,
godmother.
yes.
And I think that that's great, partly because, as I said earlier, the responsibilities are so minimal. But partly, again, I think it goes back to this idea of a
Yeah.
generative role, of being able to bless others, to call forth their gifting, which I think is what makes teaching
Yeah.
exciting for me. It's not like, here, I've got some stuff that I want to tell
Hmm.
you. And the very first year that I taught, I discovered that as much as I loved my literature classes, I liked my writing classes more
Mm,
because it had much more of that sense of coaching and calling forth and blessing the gifts that were already in the students, helping them to find their voice
right.
and helping them to know that the things they had to say mattered.
Right.
And so it's that role, that I think is just kind of how I'm wired, how God's made me, and the gifts that He's given me is to do that kind of work in the lives
I
of
love
others.
that.
So I'm quite honored by that
I
particular
love
role.
it. I love it. Do you have a usual writing spot?
So yeah, I have an office.
Hmm.
I usually write here at my iMac. I have piles of books and a big bookcase behind, and I'm always juggling at least 4 or 5 projects because I find that the part of my brain that it takes to be pre-writing, the part that's actually creating texts or drafting, and the part that's editing and revising, those are all different tasks
Hmm.
for me. And so it works really well for me to have several projects at several different
Yeah. Yeah.
stages. But I do almost all of my writing here in my home office.
All right. One last one. If you could take a vacation in any fictional world, where would you go?
Narnia,
Okay. Any particular area of Narnia you really want to make sure to see?
just to be where Aslan is,
Mm, hmm.
just to be where Aslan is, and to be where Aslan is as a physical manifestation, warm and golden,
Yeah.
to feel the breath of Aslan.
I could see you hanging with Susan and Lucy and putting your fingers through his mane and then covering your ears when he roars.
Isn't that beautiful? That's a
I could
beautiful
see that.
image. I'll carry that with me all day.
Mm. All right. Well, our time has come to an end. And I just want to thank you not only for joining us today, but just again for all of the gifts that you have shared with the world and for your personal friendship. That's been a gift as well.
Well, thank you. I think that, a lot of times when we talk about times like this, we talk about roots and fruit. And I
Hmm.
love those images, but those are long-term images,
Yeah.
and they're true. But I also like to think about sparks. And so I hope that perhaps something in our conversation would be a little spark and that
Yeah.
we could tend the flame and continue to pass it along.
I love that. I love that because a tended flame can last forever as well.
It's true.
All right. Well, listeners, may you find bookish treasures in your wanderings off the beaten path. Thanks for listening in to our conversation today on the Banderpod. We hope you'll check out our full catalog at bandersnatchbooks.com. The Banderpod is produced by Rachel S. Donahue, A.B. Donahue, and Carolyn Claire Gibbons. Audio engineering by S.D.G. Morgan. Artwork by Evelyn Warnamindy. Many thanks to our friend Chris Slayton of Son of Laughter for our theme song, Cricket in a Jar. Find links and more in the show notes.